Three nations that spent centuries as enemies are now a formal military alliance. One prophet named all three of them. He did not use code words. He did not speak in riddles. He wrote their names down 2,500 years ago and then described exactly how they would move, exactly where they would go, and exactly what would happen when they got there. But here is what makes this different from every other prophecy video you have seen. One of his 4 predictions has already come true, completely, historically, verifiably. A nation that was dead for 2,000 years came back to life on a single day. That already happened. Which means the 3 predictions still unfolding, the ones showing up in today's headlines, are coming from a source with a proven track record. This is not speculation. This is a pattern, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Most people have heard the name Ezekiel. Very few know what he actually said. He was not a philosopher. He was not a poet writing in symbols that could mean anything or nothing. He was a priest, a precise man, a man who recorded measurements, dates, names, and sequences with the kind of detail that makes historians take notice even when they disagree with the conclusions. He wrote in approximately 593 BC. That date matters, because everything he described was impossible at the time he wrote it. Not difficult, not unlikely, impossible. The nation he wrote about did not exist. The alliances he named had no basis in the politics of his era. The events he described had no historical precedent, and the temple he measured in exact dimensions had not yet been destroyed for the first time, let alone the second. He was not looking at trends. He was not extrapolating from current events. He was describing a world that would not exist for centuries, in some cases, millennia. So why does Ezekiel matter right now, in this decade, in this news cycle? Because of something that happened on May 14th, 1948. That single date is the reason this video exists. It is the reason Ezekiel cannot be dismissed as ancient religious literature with no modern relevance. On that date, something occurred that had never happened in recorded human history. Not once, not anywhere. A nation that had been destroyed, scattered, and erased from the map for approximately 2,000 years was formally reconstituted in a single day. Not rebuilt slowly over generations. Not gradually reclaimed over decades. One day, and Ezekiel had described it, specifically, with imagery so precise that when it happened, theologians and secular historians alike were forced to acknowledge the correlation. That event is the foundation of everything that follows in this video. Here is why it matters so much. If a source is proven accurate on the most impossible prediction, the one with no historical parallel, no natural explanation, no precedent in all of recorded human civilization, then that same source deserves serious attention on everything else it predicted. That is not a theological argument. That is basic logic. A track record of one verified impossibility changes the weight of every remaining claim. Ezekiel made 4 major predictions about Israel and the surrounding nations. One has been verified by history itself. 3 are active right now. But before getting to the 3 that are unfolding, there is something about the first prophecy that most people miss entirely. Something hidden inside the dry bones story that reframes everything that comes after it. And it starts not with a nation. It starts with a valley. There is a moment in Ezekiel's account that most people rush past. God does not show Ezekiel a battle. He does not show him a king rising to power or an army crossing a border. He shows him a valley, and the valley is full of bones. Not recently dead, not a fresh battlefield. These bones were ancient, completely dry, scattered with no order, no pattern, no connection to each other. The Hebrew text uses language that implies a long, long time had passed. The kind of time where even the memory of what these bones once were had been forgotten. This was not death. This was extinction. And standing at the edge of that valley, God asks Ezekiel the question that anchors this entire prophecy. Can these bones live? Ezekiel does not say yes. He does not say no. He says the only thing an honest man could say looking at total extinction. Sovereign Lord, only you know. What follows is one of the most detailed resurrection sequences in ancient literature. Ezekiel speaks to the bones. They begin to move. They connect to each other. Tendons form. Flesh covers them. Skin seals everything in place, but they still have no breath. They are bodies, not people. Only when breath enters them do they stand. And when they stand, Ezekiel records this, they do not stand as survivors. They stand as an army. That detail matters. Remember it. Now here is what Ezekiel says this vision means. God explains it directly. These bones represent the whole house of Israel, a people who would say their hope is gone, their nation cut off, finished. And God says He will open their graves, bring them back from every nation where they were scattered, return them to their own land. In 593 BC, that was an impossible statement. The northern kingdom of Israel had already been destroyed by Assyria in 722 BC. Those tribes scattered and, by every historical measure, disappeared permanently into surrounding populations. The Assyrians had a documented policy of forced population displacement, mixed conquered peoples with other conquered peoples until national identity dissolved completely. It worked on every nation they conquered, every nation except one. Then Babylon destroyed the southern kingdom. Then Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD and dispersed the remaining Jewish population across every continent on earth. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, documented the scale of that destruction. Scholars estimate the diaspora that followed scattered Jewish communities across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and eventually the Americas and beyond. For roughly 2,000 years, no Jewish state existed. Every empire that scattered a conquered people throughout history absorbed them permanently. The Assyrians are gone. The Babylonians are gone. The Romans are gone as a governing empire. The Ottoman Empire dissolved in 1922. But the people they tried to erase, still here. In 1897, the First Zionist Congress convened in Basel, Switzerland, under Theodor Herzl. A formal political movement began pushing for a Jewish homeland. That was the first rattle. In 1917, the British government issued a formal declaration supporting the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine. Documented, historical. The bones were beginning to connect. Between 1939 and 1945, 6 million Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust. By 1945, many assumed that whatever remained of Jewish national identity had been permanently broken. 3 years later, on May 14, 1948, one day, one declaration, one vote at the United Nations recognizing Israeli statehood, a nation extinct for 2,000 years stood on its feet. Now remember that detail from earlier. When the bones rose in Ezekiel's vision, they did not stand as survivors stumbling out of graves. They stood as an army. In 1948, Israel did not just declare statehood. Within hours, 5 surrounding nations attacked simultaneously. She and the newly declared state, with no established military, no air force, and almost no heavy weapons, held its ground. Bones to nation, vision to history. 2,500 years between the writing and the fulfillment. That is the foundation everything else rests on. Because here is what that proven track record means for you personally. If this source was accurate about a 2,000-year national resurrection, then every promise this same source has made about restoration, return, and things that look permanently dead deserves a second look. But the dry bones were only Prophecy 1. Prophecy 2 involves something even older, a division that happened 3,000 years ago, a wound so deep that DNA itself carries the evidence. And the healing of that wound is happening right now, in airport terminals, in immigration offices, in genetics laboratories. Ezekiel receives a second vision. This one is quieter than the valley of bones. No rattling, no wind, no vast army rising from the ground. God tells him to pick up 2 sticks, write one name on the first stick, write a different name on the second stick, then press them together in one hand until they become one. That is the entire physical act. 2 sticks, one hand. But what those 2 sticks represented had been broken for nearly 300 years when Ezekiel received this vision, and it would stay broken for another 2,500 years after he wrote it down. Here is the history that makes this prophecy remarkable. When King Solomon died around 930 BC, The exact date is debated among historians. The unified kingdom of Israel fractured. The northern tribes broke away and formed their own nation. The southern tribes remained under the line of David. Two kingdoms, two governments, two separate national identities. They are referred to in Ezekiel's vision as Judah and Ephraim. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire destroyed the northern kingdom. Those tribes, the ones represented by Ephraim, were dispersed using Assyria's documented policy of forced relocation. Ancient records, including Assyrian annals, confirm this deportation happened. What those records do not show is any trace of those northern tribes ever returning as a unified group. They became known in later tradition as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Lost. That word is important, because Ezekiel sees them found. Not just found, rejoined, pressed back together like two sticks in one hand after 3,000 years of separation. Now look at what has actually happened. In 1950, the Israeli government passed the law of return, so any Jewish person anywhere in the world had the legal right to immigrate to Israel and claim citizenship. That law is still in effect today. What followed over the next 7 decades was one of the largest voluntary population movements in modern history. In 1991, the Israeli government conducted Operation Solomon, a documented, publicly recorded airlift operation. In 36 hours, Israeli aircraft transported approximately 14,000 Ethiopian Jewish people, known as Beta Israel, directly to Israel. To fit the maximum number of people, seats were removed from the aircraft. Families who had maintained Jewish practice and identity in the Horn of Africa for centuries, largely cut off from the broader Jewish world, landed in Tel Aviv. That is documented. That happened. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, over 1 million Jewish people emigrated from the former Soviet states to Israel across the following decade. This is regarded by demographers as the largest single wave of Jewish immigration in the modern state's history. Many of these individuals had been legally prohibited from practicing their faith or publicly identifying as Jewish during the Soviet era. They came anyway. And here is where it gets scientifically interesting. Genetic studies, including peer-reviewed research published in journals including the American Journal of Human Genetics, have examined Jewish populations from Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas. The findings, while complex and still discussed among geneticists, broadly indicate shared ancient ancestry across these geographically separated communities, despite millennia of separation. Two sticks, pressed together. After 3,000 years, Jews from over 100 countries now hold Israeli citizenship. They speak different languages at home. They carry different cultural traditions. They arrived from different continents, and they are one nation under one flag, reading from one Torah in one language. That is not a political achievement. No diplomat engineered this. No international treaty produced it. No human institution planned the reunion of a people separated across 3,000 years and 6 continents. Ezekiel held 2 sticks together in his hand and described exactly this, 2 prophecies down. But the third one, the one that names specific nations by geography and by identity, that is the one that is impossible to explain away, because those nations are not just named, they are positioned, right now, exactly where Ezekiel said they would be. This is where the prophecy stops feeling like ancient history. This is where it starts feeling like a news briefing. Ezekiel receives a third vision. God tells him to set his face toward a figure called Gog from the land of Magog. A leader, a commander, someone who will be pulled. The text uses the specific image of hooks in jaws, pulled into a military campaign against Israel. Not willingly, not by choice, pulled. That image is deliberate. A fish does not swim toward a hook because it wants to. It is caught. It is dragged. Its own survival instinct is overridden by a force it did not see coming. Ezekiel is saying this leader will enter this conflict not entirely by his own design. Something, economic pressure, military entanglement, a chain of events spiraling faster than anyone can control, will make retreat impossible. Keep that image in mind. The hook, the tension on the line. Now Ezekiel names the coalition. he lists specific names: Magog, Rosh, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, Beth Togarmah. In 593 BC, these were the names of people groups, regions, and territories known to the ancient world. Identifying their modern equivalents requires consulting ancient geography, historical linguistics, and the work of scholars across multiple fields. There is genuine academic debate about some of these identifications. That needs to be stated clearly. But several of these identifications are not seriously disputed. Persia requires no scholarly debate whatsoever. Persia is Iran. The nation used that name continuously until 1935, when the government officially requested that foreign nations use the name Iran instead. Ezekiel did not use a symbolic name. How he used their actual historical name. That identification is direct. Magog, Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal are more complex. Ancient historians, including Josephus, associated Magog with the Scythian peoples, nomadic groups who occupied the region north of the Black Sea. Many modern scholars, though not all, connect these references to territories that fall within or near modern Russia. This identification is debated in academic circles and should not be stated as absolute fact. What can be stated is that the geography Ezekiel describes points consistently northward, and that matters, because Ezekiel is specific about direction. The invasion comes from the far north. This is not interpretation. This is coordinates. Take any map, find Jerusalem, draw a straight line directly north. That line passes through one major modern nation before reaching the Arctic. Russia. That is geography, not theology. Gomer and Beth Togarmah are linked by multiple ancient sources to Anatolian regions, territory that falls within modern Turkey. Again, scholars note this identification while acknowledging it is not universally settled. Cush refers to the regions south of ancient Egypt, corresponding broadly to modern Sudan and parts of Ethiopia. Put corresponds to regions west of Egypt, associated with modern Libya. Now stop and look at that list as it stands today. Iran, openly hostile to Israel. This is not analysis. Iranian government officials have repeatedly and publicly stated their opposition to Israeli statehood. Iran funds and arms Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Houthi forces in Yemen, all documented by international monitoring organizations, including the United Nations. Iran's nuclear development program continues to be a subject of international concern and ongoing diplomatic negotiation. Turkey, under its current government, has moved from a position of diplomatic relations with Israel to open hostility. President Erdogan has publicly and repeatedly criticized Israel in international forums. Turkey has suspended trade with Israel, a nation that was once a rare Muslim-majority country with formal ties to Israel, has repositioned itself dramatically within the last decade. Russia has established a documented military presence in Syria, which shares a border with Israel's north. Russia's relationship with Iran has deepened significantly, particularly following international sanctions connected to the conflict in Ukraine. Those sanctions have economically pushed Russia toward partnerships it might have avoided under different circumstances. The hook, the economic pressure, the military entanglement, the chain of events making retreat impossible. Russia did not plan to be this deeply aligned with Iran. Sanctions and geopolitical isolation accelerated a relationship that serves neither nation's traditional interests perfectly. Yet here they are, aligned, armed, positioned. Libya remains politically unstable with armed factions holding significant territory. Sudan has experienced repeated governmental instability. Both nations sit in the geographic zones Ezekiel identified. For the first time in history, and this statement can be made with confidence because it is verifiable, every nation on Ezekiel's list is simultaneously hostile to or in conflict with Israel. Some are formally allied with each other. Some are moving toward formal alignment. None of them are moving in the opposite direction. That has never been true before. Not in 1948, not in 1967, not in 1973. Now. But here is the part of this prophecy that does not get discussed nearly enough. Ezekiel does not just describe the invasion, he describes the outcome. and the outcome is unlike any conventional military result in the ancient or modern record. The invading coalition, moments before unified, armed, and advancing, turns on itself. The text describes internal chaos, panic, disease, fire, a collapse so total that Ezekiel records a specific ratio of casualties, 5 out of every 6 soldiers, not from Israeli counterattack, not from Allied intervention, from something the nations watching cannot explain through military analysis. And after it is over, Ezekiel says something remarkable. He says the nations will know, not believe, know. That is the setup for Prophecy 4, because what comes after that moment, after the world watches something it cannot explain, is the condition that makes the final prophecy not just possible, inevitable. And the physical preparations for that fourth prophecy are already complete, every single one of them. Ezekiel's fourth vision is the longest he ever recorded. 9 full chapters, not 9 verses, 9 chapters of precise measurements, detailed architecture, specific priestly duties, exact dimensions for gates, courts, chambers, and altars, the kind of detail that does not read like poetry or metaphor. It reads like a blueprint, and at the center of it all, a temple, not the temple that had been destroyed, not a rebuilt version of something that once existed, a future temple, one that had never been built, one whose construction would mark a turning point so significant that Ezekiel records the glory of God returning to fill it. Here is the historical weight behind that vision. The first temple, built under Solomon, completed around 957 BC according to most historical estimates, stood for approximately 370 years before Babylon destroyed it in 586 BC. The Babylonian destruction is one of the most documented events in ancient Near Eastern history, confirmed by both biblical text and Babylonian records, including the Babylonian Chronicles held in the British Museum. The Second Temple was built after the Jewish return from Babylonian exile, completed around 516 BC. It was later expanded significantly by Herod the Great beginning around 20 BC. Roman forces under General Titus destroyed it in 70 AD. The Roman historian Josephus documented that destruction in detail. The event is also referenced in Roman imperial records. No temple has stood on that site since. In 691 AD, the Dome of the Rock was constructed on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It has stood there for over 1,300 years. The Temple Mount is one of the most politically sensitive pieces of land on Earth. For most of the last 2 millennia, the idea of a third temple was not just politically impossible. It was physically impossible. But something has shifted, and it has not shifted in theory. It has shifted in physical, documented, observable preparation. The Temple Institute is a Jerusalem-based organization whose work is publicly documented and independently reported by news outlets, including Reuters, the BBC, and the Associated Press. Their stated mission is the preparation for a third temple. What they have accomplished is not symbolic. They have reconstructed over 70 sacred vessels required for temple service according to biblical specifications. These include the menorah, a full-scale golden reconstruction completed and publicly displayed, the priestly garments, the silver trumpets, the incense altar, all physically constructed, all documented. That is not a rumor. That is reported fact. Kohanim, men who carry documented priestly lineage, have been identified, gathered, and trained in the ritual duties described in the biblical text. This training program is ongoing and has been reported by multiple international news organizations. In 2022, 5 red heifers were transported from a ranch in Texas to Israel. This detail sounds obscure until you understand its significance. The purification ritual described in the Book of Numbers requires a specific animal, a completely red female cow with no blemish and no history of labor. Rabbinical tradition holds that this animal is extraordinarily rare. The last confirmed qualifying animal, according to some Jewish scholarly tradition, was used centuries ago. Without it, certain temple purification rituals cannot be performed. 5 candidates arrived in Israel in 2022. Now, their inspection and qualification process by Israeli rabbinical authorities has been publicly reported. The Sanhedrin, the traditional Jewish high court that had not functioned for approximately 1,600 years, was formally re-established in 2004 in Tiberias, Israel. Its legitimacy and authority are debated within Jewish religious and legal communities, but its existence is documented fact. Architectural plans for the Third Temple have been publicly released by organizations advocating for its construction. Now hold all of that together: the vessels, the priests, the purification animals, the religious court, the architectural plans. Every physical and institutional element required to begin temple service exists today. What does not yet exist is the political condition that makes construction possible on the current site. That is the one remaining gap. And this is where Ezekiel's sequence becomes impossible to ignore, because Ezekiel places the Third Temple after the Gog and Magog conflict, not before. After the moment when the world watches something it cannot explain. After the moment he describes as the point when Israel's own eyes open to who defended them. He is saying the political impossibility gets resolved by an event, a specific event. One that, according to the previous prophecy, involves the very nations currently allied and positioning themselves exactly as he described. The sequence is not random, it is a chain, and every link in that chain is now visible, which raises a question that this video has been building toward since the first frame. Still, if one man saw 1948 from 593 BC, if he saw the DNA-linked reunion of scattered tribes, if he named the exact nations now allied against Israel, if every physical preparation for his fourth prophecy already exists, what does that mean for every other promise written in the same book? That question is not rhetorical. The answer changes everything. Step back for a moment, not from the prophecies, from the noise around them. Strip away every theological argument, every denominational debate, every political opinion about the Middle East. Set all of it aside completely, and just look at the pattern. One man, one document, written in 593 BC, 4 predictions about a specific nation and the world surrounding it. Prediction 1. A nation extinct for 2,000 years would return in a single day. Historically verified. May 14, 1948. Documented by every major international news organization on Earth. Recognized by the United Nations. Undisputed by any serious historian, regardless of their position on its meaning. Prediction 2. Scattered tribes separated for 3,000 years would return to that nation from every corner of the earth and become one people again. Documented by immigration records, corroborated by peer-reviewed genetic research, visible in the citizenship rolls of a nation whose passport holders were born in over 100 countries. Prediction 3. A specific coalition of nations would align against Israel in the last days, named by geography and identity. Every nation on that list is currently hostile to Israel. Several are formally allied with each other. The alignment has accelerated in the last decade in ways that were not predictable 10 years ago. Prediction 4. A temple with exact measurements would be built. Every physical preparation for that temple now exists. The one remaining condition is political. And according to the sequence Ezekiel himself laid out, that political condition follows the event described in Prediction 3. Verified, unfolding, positioning, ready. That is not a religious argument. That is a sequence. And sequences have a logic to them. When 3 out of 4 steps in a documented pattern have either completed or are visibly in motion. The 4th step is not a matter of faith alone. It is a matter of pattern recognition. Now here is what this pattern reveals about the God behind it. Each of these 4 prophecies was impossible at the time it was written. Not difficult, not unlikely, impossible by every human standard available in 593 BC. No nation had ever returned from 2,000 years of extinction. No scattered people had ever reunified across 3,000 years and 6 continents. No coalition matching this description had ever existed. No temple had been prepared for without existing political conditions to support it. Every single one of them was impossible. Every single one of them happened anyway, or is happening now. That pattern does not just speak to nations and temples and geopolitical alliances. That pattern speaks to anything in your life that looks impossible right now. The same source that declared a dead nation would live again, while that nation lay in its driest, most forgotten state, is the same source that speaks over situations in your life that look exactly like that valley, dry, scattered, beyond recovery. Ezekiel stood at the edge of that valley and heard one question: can these bones live? The answer was not dependent on the condition of the bones. It was not dependent on how long they had been there. It was not dependent on whether anyone else believed it was possible. The answer was dependent entirely on who was asking the question, and that has not changed. But there is one more thing, one thread that has run beneath every section of this video, quietly, waiting. It involves a timeline, a specific sequence that Ezekiel did not just suggest. He locked it in, and when you see how precisely these four prophecies connect to each other, not just individually but as a single interlocking chain, the question is no longer whether the fourth prophecy will happen. The question becomes when. And the answer to that question is closer than most people are prepared for. Here is what nobody talks about when they discuss these prophecies. Ezekiel did not write four separate predictions. He wrote one sequence. That distinction matters more than almost anything else covered in this video, because a list of predictions can be coincidence. A verified sequence with internal logic and confirmed progression is something else entirely. Look at how it connects. The dry bones rise. A nation returns. That is the ignition. Without 1948, nothing else on this list is even discussable. The nation has to exist before it can be reunified. The people have to be gathered before they can be threatened. The land has to be inhabited before a coalition has a reason to march against it. Prediction 1 is not just a prophecy. It is the precondition for every prophecy that follows. Then the scattered return from 100 nations, speaking different languages, carrying different histories, and they become one. That reunification is not just a fulfillment of the two sticks vision. It is the fulfillment of the condition Ezekiel himself describes for the Gog and Magog invasion. Read his exact framing of that invasion carefully. He says it happens against a people gathered from many nations, brought back from the sword, living in the land. He is not describing a hypothetical future Israel. He is describing the Israel that exists today, gathered, returned, living in the land. The sequence locks, then the coalition forms. Russia, Iran, Turkey, Libya, Sudan, aligned, armed, hostile, positioned exactly as the geography demands. How moving into place not because any diplomat designed it, but because sanctions, wars, and economic pressure created hooks that pulled them together. And after that coalition moves, after the world watches something it cannot explain, Ezekiel describes a specific aftermath. Israel buries the weapons of the defeated army for 7 years. The land is cleansed. And then, the temple, built not in a political vacuum, built in the aftermath of an event so undeniable that the conversation about what is possible on the Temple Mount changes permanently. That is the sequence. Ignition, gathering, invasion, temple. Every step confirmed by or visibly moving toward the next. Now here's the question that this sequence forces into the open. If you are alive right now, if you are watching headlines about Russia and Iran and Turkey and Israel and wondering what is actually happening beneath the surface of the news cycle, then you are not watching random geopolitical turbulence. You are watching a sequence written down 2,600 years ago by a man standing in a valley full of dry bones, who asked one honest question and received an answer that history has been proving ever since. The bones rose, the tribes returned, the coalition is forming, and the final condition, the one that requires an event the world cannot explain before it becomes politically possible, is sitting one prophecy away. 1. Think about what that means for the timeline. Think about what it means that every preparatory element for that final prophecy already exists. The vessels, the priests, the animals, the plans, the court. Everything is ready. Everything except the moment. And there is another prophet, one who wrote centuries after Ezekiel, who described that moment in detail that makes Ezekiel's coalition prophecy look like the opening paragraph of a much longer story. He named a specific trigger, a specific figure, a specific global condition that precedes the temple by exactly